Waukesha Safety and Security Committee meeting. Today's date is December 21st, 2020. Corey Montejo will be attending the meeting virtually this evening. Julie, can you please verify that the meeting has been properly posted? Yes. Thank you.
Corey did notify us today that he's not able to attend, so.
Thank you. We'd like to start off the meeting by providing an opportunity for citizens to speak. Do we have anyone who wishes to address the committee? Okay, thank you. Okay, tonight we have one action item on the agenda, which is the minute approval of the October 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, and I'll second. Any discussion or, oh wait, I'm sorry. Did you say Corey's not even going to be on here tonight? Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll second it then. Any discussion or changes? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Passes 2-0. Next, we'll move on to the discussion and information items. We have a COVID update. Dr. Cook will provide an update of the number of COVID cases in the district.
So yeah, we, in front of you, we have a packet with several tables on it. These were generated last Friday, and they reflect the data from Friday. There hasn't been any substantial changes. We find ourselves in a pretty good position right now with fewer than 500 students on quarantine, fewer than 45 students who are testing positive currently. We have very few staff out as well. So we have kind of started the year out in a pretty good position. We ramped up the number of quarantines and cases in the middle of October into probably early November, probably right up to Thanksgiving, actually. And then upon returning from the Thanksgiving break, we've seen a steady decline in the number of quarantines and positive cases in the district. So we find ourselves in a pretty good spot right now. And just as a reminder, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, our learning models, currently at the secondary level, it's hybrid. At the elementary level, it is a 5-day-a-week face-to-face model, so.
Okay.
Certainly able to answer any questions that you may have.
Jeffrey, do you have any questions?
We didn't hit a huge spike after Thanksgiving.
We did not. And, you know, I mean,
Thank God.
we've noticed that county-wide, there's been a steady decline even since Thanksgiving. One of the new charts that we put on here, it's the last one, it's the known positive linked to school transmission. We have seen 42 students who were quarantined test positive linked to school transmission. So 42 of the 5,841, which is a very low transmission rate among students. Now, again, we don't know who was asymptomatic. Right. We don't know who was sick and didn't get tested. This is just the known cases. But recently, I believe it was at the end of October, Brown University released a study that included 200,000 students and I think 60,000 adults. And they found that the students had a positive test rate from school cases of, I think it was like 0.125%, and the adults were like 0.25%. So with all of the mitigation strategies that we've put in, the masking, the cleaning, the hand washing and sanitizing and such, we're finding that those seem to keep the infection rate low as it pertains to school. Many of the cases that we have had to address have been from contact outside of school.
Awesome.
Questions, Mr.
Nope,
McCaffrey?
that's all I had, Mr.
Okay.
Chair.
All right, then we're going to move to the transition criteria review. The second information item tonight is an update of transition criteria for moving between instructional models. Dr. Siebert and Dr. Cook will present the transition criteria, first presented at Teaching and Learning Committee meeting in November.
All right, well, I'm going to kick this off, Ms. Reinachek, thank you. And Dr. Cook is going to begin tonight by walking through a presentation that has two components. Mary Jo put this together for us. First, he will provide an update as to our mitigation strategies and some things that have changed since the beginning of the school year. And then second, he's going to review, as you stated, the updated approach for transition criteria for the district. So we've designed this new approach that we shared with teaching and learning, and it was based on feedback that we received at the November board meeting. So if we kind of dial back to that, we had some board members at that meeting saying the gate's already open, so we need transition criteria versus gating criteria based on district data. We had some board members who thought it was important to look at community trends and community data. And then we also had discussion around ensuring that the board has the final say and authority in making those decisions when we're going, as we have currently implemented, to a full 5-day or a full virtual type of model. So what we've been able to do through this model, Darren Clark actually came into our cabinet the day after that board meeting with a piece of paper about this big, and he had drawn a bunch of things out because he was sitting and listening and watching, and through that piece of paper and Dr. Cook and I continuing to work on that, he gets almost exclusively all the credit along with Darren. We have a plan that incorporates all those pieces that we're excited to talk with you about. So I will run the slides and Dr. Cook will do most of the presenting.
So thank you. So yeah, we touched on it a little bit before. I guess one of the things that I'd like to say as we go into this is we have given families choice this year for what it is that they want. And we've had, feedback on, we didn't get a choice on being in hybrid at the secondary level. We didn't get a choice, but we have provided choice in the sense that for families that have wanted virtual instruction, we have provided and been able to maintain virtual instruction at both the elementary and the secondary level. So you can see what our models are at the elementary. We have the eAchieve virtual. We have the School District of Waukesha elementary virtual. So families have 3 choices at the elementary level for what they want for their children. And then at the secondary level, we've provided eAchieve as an option, virtual live streaming, and then hybrid learning right now is our current model at the secondary level. The important thing to know about eAchieve this year, and we've talked about it, is their enrollment is about triple what it usually is. So they have seen a substantial increase in enrollment, both from in the district as well as from outside of our district through open enrollment. When we got together at the beginning of this year, Dr. Sieber, if you could advance, we based our learning model off of mitigation. What do we need to do in order to address COVID in our schools? And so we focused our school year on, and designed our instruction off of mitigation. Those were our best guesses back in August as to what we needed to do. And we've learned a few lessons as the year has gotten going. The first thing has been around mask refusal and then coming to school with a known positive case. And, we've talked about it at board meetings. We've had a couple instances where kids knew they were COVID positive. Their parents knew they were COVID positive. They sent them to school. So a few weeks back, we sent a message home to families that said that your child will be treated as a level 3 discipline, and that could result in expulsion. And we were very clear with our families at that point. Whether that has had a positive impact on known positives coming to school or not, I can't specifically say. But with the timing of that letter, plus where we're at with our current state, there may be a link to people keeping their sick kids home, as we haven't had as many cases and as many close contacts. Transportation, we began our school year out with the idea that we were going to be loading the bus from the back, meaning the first kids on the bus would go to the back, and that we would be maintaining a seating chart. In theory, that was a good idea, but we had to make an adjustment because when we were then taking the kids home, it didn't necessarily match. So we made an adjustment to that. It's been working very well. We've had very few quarantines from bus situations this year. The bus company has been excellent with us in giving us the video of routes so that we can go back and determine close contacts if it's possible. Buildings, we have provided music-specific PPE so that our bands and choirs can get up and running. We started the year out with essentially no performance, and what we learned and what we observed in other school districts was kids were getting this opportunity. We had a lot of research done at the school level by our music folks, and they were able to recommend some stuff. So PPE has been purchased and music has commenced in the district. Our foods classes, we started the year out with no food prep, again, not knowing what it was. This year, I believe it was in October, we had the discussion then about allowing cooking. So kids are using prepackaged, not necessarily prepackaged, pre-prepared meals. They're able to cook those meals, and then they're not sharing them in any way. The food is being disposed of, or the student may eat it themselves. But we wanted to give that authentic learning opportunity for kids in the foods classes. We've adjusted the amount of time that something must sit. We're returning things to circulation within 48 hours instead of 72 hours. And that's been as research has been updated on this virus, we've tried to stay fluid with it as well. And then we've continued to update our employee documents. The CDC, as they've updated, we've provided that to staff. We've updated our staff attestation document, as well as our student one as the year has gone forward. And then we've maintained our FAQ for staff. As the county has made adjustments, we too have made adjustments to quarantine. Most recently, on December 7th, we updated our quarantine guidelines to reflect the CDC. We are now following the 7 and 10 day quarantine period. People can return on the 8th day or the 11th day should they monitor their symptoms. So we've stayed on top of that as well. The next area that we wanted to talk to you about, and this lens, shines a little bit of light on how we've been addressing positive cases in our school. So you guys as board members will get the emails from Dr. Siebert when we close a classroom down, and we had to create we had to create a framework for us to refer to when making a decision on closing. And it's not hard and fast, as do we close a school or do we close a classroom? What we're finding in many instances is that at the elementary level in particular, that one positive student, due to the structure of the day, would close an elementary classroom. Kids take their masks off when they eat. Our instructional model involves grouping. Kids have masks off at the recess time or play together at the recess time. So we knew we had to build in masking breaks for kids, which is essential. They're little kids. It's not that comfortable to wear a mask all day. And we've learned as we've gone. So what we did was we put a chart together that really addresses the size of our schools. So we have some schools this year that have fewer than 200 kids. And then we look at the number of positive cases in a classroom. And the reason why we have 3 cases in a classroom, we did talk generally speaking about how the elementary, but East Alternative High School falls into this category. And students at East will be in a desk. They'll be separated. So we have a little bit more ability to control the flow there, whereas in the elementary classroom, we don't. So that would account for the adjustments. We also talked then about the number of positive cases that would trigger the school to need to close. And in these smaller environments, 3 has been a guide because 3 cases could trigger a number of quarantines, which could then trigger a number of substantial disruption, to learning. So Dr. Siebert, if you could forward along. Similarly, 200 to 400 kids, here was the range that we're looking at. And then 400 to 600, this accounts for our middle schools, where we're looking at 7 cases. You've seen communication come home that a house has been closed down or a grade level or the whole middle school. We've really tried to treat each situation to try to focus on the smallest number of kids that would be impacted by transitioning to virtual. We haven't wanted to come through and just close everything down. So we've discussed each of these situations with the principals, with our contact tracing team. We do not have any schools at the moment that are between 600 and 800 students. That could happen if people select to come back in a face-to-face model more frequently, but we've got a number of students who have selected virtual for the year. Then we have our high schools. Interestingly enough, Dr. Siebert and I have had the opportunity to talk to some other school districts, and when we show them that we would have 15 possible infections in the school as a benchmark to discuss closing the school, they can't comprehend having 15 infections in their school. They feel that that number is extremely high. Our experience has shown us that we have hit that a couple of times. We've stayed below that, though, even through our peaks on many occasions. So we feel that that's a very workable number for us and a very manageable number. Again, those 15 positive infections, they could affect 30 kids, 40 kids, or in one instance this year, West had 200 and some kids out due to a very unique type quarantine situation. So there's some variability as can we keep the school open. We also have the discussion around staff. Do we have enough staff to keep the school open? And in many instances we have. We found a way to have classrooms covered. In some instances, though, we haven't been able to cover. You've seen a number of staff out due to being sick. You've seen them out quarantined. But then they're also dealing with other issues in their own lives. And you eventually hit a threshold where you can't keep the school open anymore. So that's how we've approached classroom and school level decisions as the school year has gone forward. Dr. Siebert, if you could advance. We've looked at, trying to keep looking at our staffing and our student attendance rates at 25% absenteeism for students and 20% absenteeism for staff. Again, just as a guideline, but not a hard and fast rule for us. If you could advance again, Dr. Siebert. Then we get into this idea of what are the criteria that we're going to monitor that the whole board would then be triggered. And so as we have learned from this school year, again, there was no good guidance going into this year. The Department of Health Services at the state didn't give us much. The county didn't give us much. So we had to learn as the year went forward. And so if we have 5 consecutive days of student absenteeism and or 20% of staff absenteeism over 5 days, and or 75% of our subfill rate is not met, below that, and or 25% of our buildings are in virtual learning. And then I'm going to skip over. We have 1,100 positive cases per 100,000. I'll talk about that in a moment. 75% of the hospital beds are full, acute beds, and 85% of the ICU beds. So if we have, of those 7 criteria, if we hit those rates, and we can't run food service or transportation, then we have issues. So for instance, if food service can't be run because of staff for a day, Dr. Siebert would be in a position similar if we had a blizzard come through where he may have to close the district because we don't have enough people to cook food. Similarly, if we don't have enough bus drivers to run, we may have to close until there's enough bus drivers. We've been very fortunate that the Milwaukee Public Schools is not open because we've been able to bring in drivers from Milwaukee to help sub. We may have had a couple of days where we couldn't run buses because of the driver absenteeism. But those would be triggers. But then, Dr. Siebert, if you go forward, if we hit 6 of those criteria from the prior slide, that would then trigger a board meeting to have a discussion on the learning model that we would be in. One of those data points when this was first put together, the community cases, the 1,100 per 100,000, we far exceeded that at the time that this was put together. And then as the environment has changed, the county began to change how they tracked cases. And those cases then were tracked on the number of new cases over a 10-day period of time. And so what we're doing right now is we're trying to gather some data over a few weeks to try to determine where are we trending at. The county, or the Waukesha School District boundaries, we are trending downwards substantially. Today we had 2,500 cases in the last 10 days. When they made the adjustment, we were at about 3,400 cases. So we see ourselves going in that direction. We don't have that graph made yet. At the time, though, you could see where we were at. We were greater than 1,100 cases on every day that we were in session. The yellow days are the days that we weren't in session. So we have to try to figure out what this number means for us going forward, and we need a little bit more time to gather that data. We'll monitor that over the winter break here, just to see if we keep that case, some case history there. But anyway, if we go forward, then we trigger a board meeting that then we make a recommendation to the board. For instance, do we go back to a 4-day-a-week face-to-face model? Do we go to 5 days a week face-to-face? Or is the environment such that we have to go virtual everywhere? And then we come to you and present that then, and the board has the decision. So again, like Dr. Siebert said, Darren was able to sit in his office and, do a really good job listening as the board was having its discussion, as we were presenting. And he kind of sketched out this model, and then we looked at the data that we were able to maintain and had readily available, and we were presenting this to you tonight as a discussion item to get some feedback. I believe we're looking at bringing this forward in January then to the board to get like the stamp that says this will be how we operate going forward for the rest of the year then. So
I think one of the other nice things that will complement this is that each of these is an active link, which means that for each of these criteria, we can add those to our dashboard, and that will continue to help with the transparency that so many people are asking us for.
I think it's great. I think what I really like is that you have to hit the, 6 of the 8 benchmarks, so it's not just one thing, because one thing can skew the whole discussion.
right, and
If you're only doing one.
And if you look around the state, there's a number of counties and school districts that have never opened up this year in a
Right.
face-to-face model. And they relied, I believe, heavily, the stuff that I followed, heavily on that concept of gating criteria.
Mm-hmm.
And that gating criteria was based off of information that we had in this summer, and we've certainly learned that, you can keep schools open, that the rate of infection in schools isn't as high as it is elsewhere, that proper mitigation can prevent this, from having, widespread in the schools. So, we're fortunate that we've learned what we've learned.
Yeah, I think the hard work that we did in the schools with the mitigation is why we're in the position we're in right now. And we have our elementary school kids 5 days a week because it's tough to teach someone to read virtually. So I think that's really the work that we did in the schools has really kept us going. No, I like it.
6 out of the 8.
Well, we had a pretty good discussion on what was reasonable. If we said 8 out of the 8, I guess going into this, if you look at that, at the time that this was presented, 2 of them were already met. The sub rate was already met, and the cases per 100,000 was already met. And so 2 of the 8, we already said we weren't meeting this benchmark already. Our sub rate is below 75% right now. And if you were to break that out by employee group, like for support staff, we've got about a 30% fill rate with support staff this year, and I think that that's being generous. And at the time, the cases per 100,000, as we talked about at the November board meeting, when we presented the information at the November meeting, it was 900 and some cases as of the meeting. By the time we put this chart together, we were already at 1,400 cases per 100,000, and that peaked at about 2,500 cases per 100,000 at the time. So we had 2 criteria met already. We also had a fair amount of data on staff and student absenteeism. And when we hit some marks along the way, so our schools were open in the model that we were in. When we were at our highest level of quarantines and positive infection and students being out of school for other reasons, as well as staff, we weren't at this 20 and 25% mark yet. Our highest day, I think, of staff absenteeism was 16%. And I think in a few instances, our overall student number in the district was at about 76, 77%. Again, those were during the areas where we had the most struggle. So if we were projecting forward and saying we are going to get to an environment that is worse than where we are at right now, we felt that these numbers were very appropriate. So when you put that whole thing together, that's why we came to 6. We thought that it was a reasonable marker. There's 2 criteria up there, food service and transportation. Those are a yes or no. We can be open if we have staff. If we don't have staff, we can't be open. So again, that's where we came to 6 of 8.
So backing up to some slides, when you were talking about music and foods,
Yep.
I didn't understand those. Can you touch on those again? The music you received, I know that music wasn't happening or it was happening outside, the
Yep.
lessons, band, there were some, yeah, if you could just touch on that again, that'd be great.
So we began the year without having performance music, particularly with wind instruments in schools. Our music folks, were in consultation with their peers and other school districts, as well as doing research on their own, and they found instrument covers and PPE that would allow people to play an instrument, particularly a wind instrument. So we were able to say, yes, we will do this, and let the kids have the experience. The same thing with foods, the idea of gathering and preparing food and then sharing that food. At the beginning of the year, we decided we weren't going to do that in a foods class. It would be very theory-based, but it wouldn't have been hands-on. As the year went forward, we had our foods teachers work very closely with their counterparts at the university level, and then also looking at what the restaurant industry was doing, and we allowed then food preparation then to happen in our classes. And that happened sometime in October, I believe.
So as for the marching bands and flute, how can you have, what are you doing for the flute where they're blowing actually over the instrument and not into the instrument?
I'd have to go into the music class and take a look at that.
But you're telling me that all music can happen now,
We are allowing music to happen now, yes.
okay?
The hybrid model at the secondary has really allowed us to separate kids and put very few kids in the classroom. And so it's been beneficial from a performance standpoint to have fewer kids in the room. We can have other kids assigned to other locations. You have very large music rooms, very few kids in that room. They can be in there working with their teachers. So that's been one of the things that's helped accomplish that in music.
Okay, and as far as marching band, we weren't even having marching band even out on the huge fields.
Correct. The Marching Band Association canceled that.
Okay,
So from a performance standpoint, when our bands were getting together, the band association canceled band before the school year started. And that didn't involve a school district decision. That was outside of us.
okay. And then, so based on this going forward, there is no talk of going back to 4 or 5 days in the secondary level?
We're not talking about that right now. I mean, I think that Dr. Siebert and you guys as a board we'll be talking about that, I think, in January. The January 13th board meeting, I think, is when that's going to be.
Okay, so is this we're going to be voting on this in the January meeting to stay at primary the way it is, secondary the way it is, and then having 6 to 8 criteria to cancel? No.
We're going to be proposing these criteria as transition criteria, but the learning model will be a separate conversation at that board meeting.
Okay,
Yeah, there were 2 distinct motions.
I see.
As Dr. Cook pointed out earlier, I mean, our numbers look good, and we're just excited to get through Christmas now and see, to Mr. McCaffrey's point, if we can get through Christmas without that spike that we avoided. We had it for Halloween, we avoided it for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, which was fantastic.
Yeah, if we can avoid it for Christmas, all signs would point to being able to have more in-person learning at the secondary, which would be great.
So I have just a question on the food prep, and this doesn't end about a class. Do we have student workers that work for Airmark or that work in the kitchen? Because the school district that I work in, we do.
I don't
They're in my
believe
program.
so.
Okay.
I certainly could check on that.
Okay,
though.
I was just
don't
wondering
believe
if
so.
they had, decided not to do that.
And I wanted to touch a little bit on food as well. I have heard from a couple of kids, like when they're at home and they're having their virtual days, when they're supposed to be cooking, there's really nothing that they can do. And like the teacher will just say, well, cook something. But it's very hard to have a cooking class at home. And then one of the foods teachers was saying that in order to have foods them to be able to cook in school, it would have taken so much work to have them all not touch. I mean, it was way too much work. So is that more at the secondary? I'm sorry, is it more in the high school versus the middle school? Or how are they doing foods?
So I don't have the exact instructional design. We began the year out by saying no food prep in school in the foods classes. And then Molly Heilberger Haubenchild in the FACE coordinator, as well as Rachel Herman, approached me and said, well, what would it take? And so we looked at the restaurant industry. We looked at what the universities were doing and such. They came forward with a mitigation plan to address COVID in the classroom. And they came forward with some recommendations. I believe it was right before we took that end of October break. And so then we said by November 1st, which I think, was getting close to the start of the second quarter, that they could start with the food prep in class. So I don't know, my assumption was it was at all secondary schools. But again, something we can look into to get the details.
Thank you. Okay, any more questions or comments, Mr. McCaffrey? Okay. Sorry, I take a lot of notes and it sounds so. Okay, so then other business. Do we have any recommendations for future committee meetings?
I have none
Okay.
at this point.
Okay. Then that concludes our agenda. The next Safety and Security Committee meeting is scheduled for February 15th, 2020.